Hey everybody, this is Nate Moore with Melco. I'm a member of the applications team, and this afternoon, used to morning, but it's afternoon. This afternoon, I'm going to be talking with you guys a little bit about converting artwork just from straight graphics files, such as a raster file like a PNG or a JPEG or something like that, or a vector file such as an EPS into embroidery, and hopefully we're going to be doing it in a little more automatic way with a little bit more help than just me having to trace out everything the way that you would normally see me digitize. This is not our normally scheduled time and any of that, and what happened was I got a phone call or an email yesterday asking about it and what resources did we have on converting artwork to embroidery. And I said, well, we've got information in the help manual. So there is this in the manual. I'm not entirely sure I have the newest manual up on my screen for you guys. I think I do, but I'm not completely positive. But you can scroll through the table of contents and you can click on converting artwork to embroidery and it will take you right to it. Another thing, I don't know if you guys know that you can do this with your manuals, but on your keyboards, if you hit Control F, you can bring up a find box so you can search the whole manual for specific words. So if you were looking for changing something from a graphic, you could change and find graphic and go to the next place that it finds it, or the previous place that it finds it, and it's going to jump up and down through the manual until you find what you're looking for. So that's one way to navigate through that. So as well as being able to re-watch this at some other time, you also have a written example of kind of what I'm talking about. Let me get this out of the way. Let's look at the differences in those files that I was talking about. The first one I was talking about was a raster file. So let's go ahead and open one of those up. I put all of my files together so that I could keep track of them for what we're talking about today, but you have a lot of sample files in the designs folder on your local drive that was loaded with your software. There's a graphics folder in there, and there's a lot of things in there to play with. Most of these are in there, not all of them. I made a few special ones just for today to talk about specific applications. But let's look at one that you definitely have in there, and that is chilipepper.bmp. Now, I have my extensions shown. A lot of Windows environments tend to hide known extensions. But I have mine shown just so that I can see what I'm dealing with a little bit more quickly. And you can do that too through your view options in Windows Explorer if that's something that you need to do. So I'm going to open this up and let's take a look at what this actually looks like. There we go. And if I zoom in, and I'm using the Shift key and the scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom in, raster artwork tends to be basically a bunch of little squares of colors that make up an image. And the higher your resolution, the more squares you have to make up that image. But they're always going to have a little bit of a jagged edge if you zoom in far enough. So that is one thing to look about when we talk about vector. Those have very, very clean lines. They're actually vector shaped, shapes made out of lines rather than little bitty squares. And so those are actually a little bit easier to deal with when it comes to embroidery, because if you think about the way that you digitize and certainly the way that I digitize, most of my time is spent kind of tracing around the outside edge of my design. And with a vector design, those shapes are already there. So I can just grab those shapes and assign stitch parameters to them. I want to have this filled with a fill stitch, and I want it to have this stitch length and this direction and this density and all that kind of good object property stuff that we talk about. All right, but this one, if you look at it and you see that kind of very pixelated edge. You definitely know that this is a raster image. Let's talk about what we can do with this one to start. All right, so let me zoom back out. And a lot of the things that I'm talking about today are going to depend on what features you have in the software that you have. So some of them are level dependent, some of them are feature dependent. So just kind of bear with me on that. If you've got it, great. If you don't and you need it, you can talk to your salesperson about possibly upgrading and getting that feature for you. I unfortunately, from one day to the next, can never remember what version has what, so I apologize for that, but you'll just have to bear with me a little bit. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select my image file or my graphic in my project view. And once that's done, I've got a few options over here. And these three guys here, and then some of the editing tools are going to be what we're talking about mostly today. The first one I'm going to look at is probably the fastest, easiest kind of way to do that, I think. And that is and I know this says vector objects, but it does it with kind of any image. It's the one on the right. And if I click this, I will get my image processing options that pop up. And the first one I want you to look at is the very top drop down. Now you have the option, if you want to have a little bit more editability, to change this to vector first. And a lot of people do that, and I think a lot of people do that because it's the first option in that drop down. If I change this to embroidery, I can bypass that step completely and go straight to embroidery. But I do kind of want to look at my other options that are in here. So the next one down is my number of colors. I can go less or more. This is a pretty plain cut, relatively speaking, image. I've got 3 colors in here. So yeah, I'm good with just the 3. You've got an image filtering slider. So how am I picking up if this had a few more shades of red or a few more shades of green? How am I deciding where that is? You can slide more or less. Your overlap points. If I have elements that overlap, how much do I want them to overlap? We all know that if things line up on screen, they most definitely will not line up in the final sew out because stitches pull, and when they pull tight. So if I have edges that line up perfectly on screen as they pull tight, there will be a little bit of a gap. So typically we overlap them a little bit. This is asking how much we should overlap that. And right now it's set to 5 points. 5 points, since an embroidery point in your software is the same as 1/10 of a millimeter, we are dealing with 1/2 millimeter of overlap. And that's not a ton of overlap. So you may see me bump this up a little bit. I may consider bumping it up to maybe 10 points. Below that, you could launch it into an image editor. I'm not going to do that. I'm pretty good with what I've got here right now. And below that, you've got a checkbox that says, do you want me to include the background? Do I want to include this big white box around my chili pepper? No, not so much, not right now. So I'm leaving that unchecked. And then below that, you've got the order of colors that you want to sew out. And I'm not entirely sure how it chose red, then black, then green. Maybe by the amount, I don't know. It could look really nice that way. You could kind of fill in and then have the leaf and the stem sew over the black, or if you wanted, you could click and drag across and change that order so that you're sewing all of the pepper and then all of the green and then outlining it all. So it's completely up to you. You do have control over this stuff. I'm going to hit OK, and now my design is actually stitches. And what I typically do is I will hide that artwork just by clicking on that little eyeball on the back. So now I can see that I have my stitches. If I put it into 3D, you can see those stitches. And you could be done at this point. And so I just took a raster image made up of all those little pixels of color, and I clicked on a button. Now, you guys can do this much faster than me. I was trying to walk through all of my decisions out loud, which is hard for me, and I was talking to you guys about it. But you could do it basically in a couple of clicks and you would have stitches. Now, would you be done? You could be. Am I? Probably not. I might go in and edit my stitch direction. So I'd grab that fill and you can see this stitch direction line. You can edit that stitch direction. So you'll hear me when I'm digitizing and I'm digitizing fills, you'll hear me talk about going across the form or taking something cross contour. I typically do that a lot to give something a little bit more depth. And then if you really wanted to go crazy, you could even right click on that and add it a little bit of a curve, and that's going to give that pepper just a little bit more dimension. And that wasn't that much editing, and I feel like it added quite a bit to even just how this sewed out. Now, the other thing that you may want to consider, and I'm guessing that you guys will have a little bit better luck than me right now, is I have some kind of weird defaults in my software because I'm me and I go in and I change those things. If you don't have underlay, you probably want to add that, so think about that. But if you're running with some of our newer software, I'm guessing you guys are getting some pretty good underlay already. But if it's not to your liking, you can always go in and edit that, and you can do that through object properties by right-clicking and going to properties. It's on here so you can see. Going to underlay, you could just click auto if you wanted, and that would get you something. If you wanted a little bit more control, you could just choose, I want to fill here and maybe a different fill here. I'm probably going to crisscross these. So that's typically what I do with a lighter density. Now they kind of crisscross over each other and stabilize that area. And so again, I'm looking at the clock, and we've been talking for about, or I guess I've been talking. You guys haven't been able to say much to me, I'm sorry. Been talking for about 10 minutes, and we have this design for the most part done. I did that while explaining everything. So conversion can be a good tool. You just want to make sure that you go in and take care of a few things that you might be missing. Make sure you have tie stitches. I believe that you will, but just do me a favor, double check it. And then think about your underlay, your density, those kinds of things. If you've got good defaults set up, it will take care of that very nicely. I unfortunately don't have that set up right now because the last thing I was doing was testing something where I had all of that stuff turned off, and so I don't have the same stuff you have. All right, so that's one way to handle, and that is with Raster. And you saw me go ahead and change it, but then you saw me also go ahead and edit it. Both of those are completely valid options and ways to go with that. Again, for me, when I digitize, I don't care if it's a conversion or if it is me manually digitizing something. It is very, very, very rare for me to have something digitized and go sew it out on my machine and have it sew out perfectly. It's very rare that I expect to not edit something. So just have a test sew out on the material as close as to your final product as you can come up with, and make sure you're good with that, and then go ahead and sew the final product after you've edited. Okay, so I'm going to close this. No, I don't want to save that. Thank you very much. And then let's look at another way to deal with stuff. We had, well, yeah. Let's open up coffeecup.eps, and this is one that you have in your sample files. So this is one that you guys can play with as well. And when you open a vector object, you'll notice anymore. Now this is a change. I don't remember when we put this in the software, but there will be a raster image right below your vector elements. So you have your vector elements, you have all of those shapes already done. That's kind of what that vector artwork brings to the party, so to speak. So all I have to do is kind of give it information, stitch information. But if I hide this, below that you will see that kind of pixelated image. And in this case, with the coffee cup, it doesn't matter as much. I'm going to open one that it would matter a little bit more so you can kind of understand why we did that. And I have this M here. And this M, as it opens, we have some shapes. But if I hide this vector, you can see, I should have been a little bit more dramatic in my setup, The bottom of the M here is a little bit lighter and it's a little bit darker up here. So this was meant to emulate water. It's got, you know, this kind of gradient and some interesting things like that. Those types of things don't translate well to embroidery. So for the vector shapes, let me turn those back on, we can capture that, but we have just a flat color in here. So we give you the vector shapes, you have the ability to edit them, that's great, you can give them the stitch information, but we also put the gradient behind it, or pardon me, the raster image behind it to show any gradients, any kind of fuzzy drop shadow, anything like that, so that you have the shapes, but you also have what the original artwork was intended to look like, so that you can go back in and maybe you add some special effects like blending colors. We talked about that in an earlier session. Let's go back and look at this coffee cup. So typically for me, if I have something that's very, very clean like this and very flat colors, and I don't need the raster image, you may see me just lock it and hide it, or I may just delete it. It's completely up to you how you want to handle it. So I'm going to grab this vector list, and again, there are very fast ways to do it and a little bit more controlled ways to do it. The first way is to just select the vector list and hit convert. But there are a couple options I want you to look at. The biggest one I want you to look at is flatten. What that does is, if you have a piece like this shine over the coffee itself, so we have this little bit of reflected light over the coffee itself, depending on the size, you may want to have a hole in there. Now for something like this, I typically don't, but you may want to have a hole in there. If you do, when you have this, go ahead and leave flatten, and that will kind of pop that out for you. If you want everything as the vector is, so that whole circle, you can uncheck it. And if you forget and you pop those things out, so I typically don't want it, but I have this checked right now, and if I hit convert, I convert to embroidery as default, so it's going to figure out, based on the size of everything, what type of stitch to use. If I hit convert, it will automatically convert that to stitches. I'm going to hide that artwork. I'm going to show just my stitches, and if you look, zoom in here real quick, it gave me an overlap. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can see I've got a little bit of an overlap here. But I do have a hole in that coffee because I didn't uncheck that. When flatten's on, it will kind of block those pieces out. If you did that and you didn't mean to, you can always go back in and edit out that hole by just selecting the fill and then the hole and then hitting delete. So again, you've got ways to do that. So this, let me move this over here, is just kind of the automatic, just converted kind of thing. Let me duplicate this. I'm going to move this over here. And now I'm going to start to edit this a little bit. So you've got these shapes. And first of all, I probably want to trim between these. I don't like these connectors, so I could change that with properties, or I could just go in and insert a trim. Now I have this set up for a keyboard shortcut. You guys have the ability to do that. Just go to Tools and Accelerator Editor, and you should be able to assign accelerators like you want. Like, so I did for trim, I just have it set to, if I hit the T on my keyboard, it will insert a trim. But to do that, you would select the command, come in here, type the command that you want. I already have it, but hit assign and then OK, and it's very important that you hit both those things. If you don't hit assign and then just hit OK, it's not going to be assigned. Close out of that. All right, so I've got this shape. Let's go ahead and edit it a little bit. I'm going to change my stitch directions. I'm going to curve this just a bit, just to give it a little bit more of a roundedness. And let me change my exit point so it doesn't meet back up with itself. I try very hard not to do that if I can avoid it. I like that satin handle. Let's change this, so I'll give it a slight slant. It kind of works. And then the other thing I'm going to do, for some reason it gave this a bunch of stitch directions. I'm going to just give it one, and I'm going to be just slightly off the one above it. I could go completely into it and then those stitches would fall in a little bit. I want it just off a touch so it falls in a little, but it's not completely sinking down in, because I want to kind of blend this a little bit just because it's light reflecting off the top of the coffee. And to give it a little bit more of that effect, I'm going to go into effects and I'm going to give it a random edge. So now it looks like I've got a few ripples in my coffee, and that light's being played off of those ripples a little bit. And then for this steam, well, honestly, rarely do I see steam that is this solid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my properties and I'm going to use my stitch type to further the effect of the steam. And I'm going to change that from a satin stitch to an edge fill. And that will have the stitches go along the form as opposed to across, which I know is typically not what I would do, but it can lend kind of interesting effects here. Now it is a little bit tight. I want it to be a little more translucent, a little more steam-like. So I'm going to open up that density a little bit. Let's try a 12, and I'm kind of guessing at this. That looks pretty good. However, my steam is looking a little, well, chunky. I don't know, blocky. So because my stitches are so long, to help further that effect of the curve, what I'll do is I will shorten my stitch length, maybe to a 25, and that starts to curve out a little bit better. And now I'm really getting some interesting steam effects on that cup of coffee. So just with a few edits, I can really further the effect of my embroidery. Here's kind of the automatic. Here is essentially automatic with a few edits. Should probably trim in between here. And in just doing that, you can completely further the effect of your embroidery. And I think that's a nice, quick way to do it, with some useful tweaks here and there. Now there are some other ways, so let's do something a little bit more complex. And I'm going to open, let's do Melco Shield for right now. And this too is one that you have. And again, I could grab this and I could just hit convert and it will do a fairly nice job of it. However, with flatten, you can see I've got all these holes inside of the underneath my letter, so it's meeting back up with itself a lot. And with the amount of space that letter takes up, I don't really see that being necessary. Now, if this was a full jacket back, I would consider it, but because this is quite a bit smaller, I'm gonna go, yeah, I don't really need to do that. So let me do this again. I'm just gonna delete that. This time I'm going to uncheck flatten. I'm going to hit convert. Now it's using just the vector shapes themselves. And so now I have what the vector shapes were. I've got all of this, but as you can see, everything is very kind of one direction. You can go in and edit that. Change that up a bit. And again, if I move my exit point, I cannot meet back up with myself, which is always handy for me. I'm going to push away from stuff that I've sewn before, so I'm going to push away from the center point. Go. Okay, not bad. And if you look at, let's look at this inline here. You can see these, the yellow dotted lines are your stitch directions. The green lines are splice lines, and what those allow you to do is have opposing stitch directions. If you look, and change this color to blue. Yeah, blue will work. you can see that I've got this vertical stitch direction here and this horizontal stitch direction here. If this was all just one fill without subdivisions, which is what those splices get you, I couldn't do this. Let's go back to that coffee cup real quick. So, for example, what we would have happening is a stitch direction that goes vertical and a stitch direction that goes horizontal, and while I can put that in there all day long, it's going to either have to ignore a bunch of them to even generate stitches, or if you get enough of them in there, you might not have stitches at all. So to kind of further the capabilities of what a fill can do, we have those splice lines. So let's open up another one. This is one that you don't have. This is one that I created just for today. And what it is this really kind of swirly, squirrely S. It's got a lot of pieces to it. I'm going to delete the raster behind it. And then my light went off. There we go. If I don't move enough, that's what happens. The other way to attack kind of vector conversion is to select the elements themselves and give them the information that you want. So let's go back and do that with the coffee cup real quick. I'm going to delete this. I'll delete this again, and I will just show that coffee cup. So the way to attack it piece by piece, if you want to do something a little bit more manually, is to select the element that you want to change into embroidery in this case. I'm going to go over to my editing tools. I'm going to say, okay, I want you to start here, I want you to stop here, and I want you to have this stitch direction. Now it's using kind of all those automatic features. If I wanted to do this with the steam and I wanted it to automatically go into kind of those other types, you know, you can change what you want that to become. And then even afterwards, you can go back in and edit them. So keep that in mind. All right. Let's go into this scroll. So I've got this scroll here. It is all one big piece, and I could just make this one big fill. I think it could be far more dynamic than that. So what I'm going to choose to do in my editing tool is to grab a splice tool. And you can just insert a straight splice. In this case, I'm going to insert a curved splice because we've got a lot of curvilinear pieces here. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to dictate where those pieces kind of overlap, or where I think that break should be. I digitize it just like I would, in this case, just like I would a walk stitch, where I click and then right click and then click again. And if you don't, and I hit enter to complete that splice, you can see that green line. If I don't like it, I can edit it later. Don't stress, or try not to stress. I'll block that piece off because that feels separate to me. And then here you have a bunch of decisions. Which piece do you want to feel like is coming on top? Which piece do you want to feel like is going underneath? Since I went underneath here, I feel like I'm going to make this go over the top, so I'm going to create a curved splice line that goes this way, and then another one here. So now you're kind of, in essence, kind of completing the drawing. Here I'm going to go the other way, so it goes over and under. There we go. And then, is that all of them? No, we have one more, two more sets. So we have this piece here. And do I want this piece to come up? No, I think I want the S to look like an S. So I'll curve that around. I'm going from edge to edge across the form because I'm breaking this up into subsections. And then because this piece went over, I think I'll make this piece go under or over? Under, let's go over. That's completely an aesthetic decision. You could have gone the other way, completely up to you. There's also a manual option for this tool. So if you decide, or pardon me, we are using the manual option. there is an automatic option for this tool. So if you have a piece like the inline of that shield, you can say, I want you to figure this out, click on it, and it will figure out those splice lines for you. Because this is so curvilinear and artistic, I decided I want to do it. I'll take you back and show you the automatic version on that shield in a moment. So now let's kind of figure out what we want to do. So I grab my stitch direction tool. I'm going to change my stitch type. This just begs to be a satin stitch to me. So I'm going to change this to satin because it just is what it's begging to be in my head. And then I'm going to start by putting in some stitch direction lines. So I'm going to put in one here. And then I'm going to change the color to pink so you guys can see it a little bit better. Or maybe a gold. Let's do a gold. And then I'm going to continue putting in stitch direction lines wherever I think they'll be helpful. So I want these stitches to curve around the form, come this way, yeah. Okay, so again, you're dealing with kind of those subdivisioned pieces. Come across here, across there, across there. So you'll notice when I'm putting these in, I still haven't affected the main portion of the S at all because I've not put in a stitch direction there. As soon as I do, I'm going to start affecting these. I can have it kind of curve around the form. If you want it, so how it's starting to filter out because stitches are too short here, if you want it to stop a little bit early for push reasons, you can do that. Or if you want to cut it off a little early because it's getting a little thin, instead of left clicking and dragging across the form with a stitch direction line, you can right click and drag across the form and you get a completely different color. You get a red colored line. That is an end line and that will make it stop early before the end of the form. And it will also give you a nice complete stitch wherever that line is. So for here, you know, we might try something else. We might try putting in another splice line like that. And just to see how it looks in 3D, I actually really like that. That I don't like so much, so let's try to even that out a little bit. Grab that stitch direction line and bring that back in. There we go. That's a little bit better. It's not transitioning so well, but I kind of like that little bit. And if I hide the wireframe form, you can see kind of that little dimple that's created there, and I really kind of dig that. All right, so we've got most of this done. We just have this bottom piece left to do. So let's give it a couple of stitch direction lines to finish this off. Straight up and down, it's going to be that way across the entire form because I only have one stitch direction in that sub-region. So I'm going to go across here and there. Let's try to curve it. So here we did it in two pieces. Here we did it in one. And honestly, what I may choose to do is sew this out with both of them, see which one I like better, and then make the other one match the one that sews out better. So when you are setting up to do your test sews, give yourself an option, or do it both ways and see which one works out better for you. You got a lot of editability and a lot of kind of tools for this, so I'm kind of digging this. Let's go back to that Melco shield. Let's delete all the crazy stuff I put in here. Get a drink so I can have a voice again. And then let's look at doing this. We did it completely automatically. You've seen me do stuff completely manually. Let's look at kind of the in-between here. So I'm going to kind of grab these three pieces and I'm going to say, all right, you know what? I want these to be just complex fill with a single direction. I'm going to convert that. Done. So those are done. That's not complicated. That was kind of the easy stuff. And then let's take the outline. So I think I would probably do the fill and then the outline and then probably the inline to kind of cover anything up that's too big of a gap. I'll go ahead and just, you know what, I'll just drag my stitch directions across that. Let's do complex fill automatic, bring this across, and I'm just going to do one stitch direction across that way. When we had just one piece of a fill and I did opposing stitch directions, it didn't work. Because this has a hole in it, it can transition around that form if I give it to. So if I go right across here, and I'm actually holding Alt to keep that completely vertical, it just navigated all of that, and now it is going all the way around the form. And I think that's going to work fairly well for me. If you want to help it out a little bit, you can come in and give it a little bit more guidance if you want. How many stitch directions and where you put them, it's kind of up to you. Sometimes less is better. Sometimes some corners, some shapes need a little more help than others. All right, so let's look at, I'm going to hide this so we can see this piece a little bit better. Let's look at this black piece here. This has some subregions, or at least it probably should to sew out well. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go into my insert splice tool, and on the very last one it has a little computer up in the corner, and that's just meaning I need the computer to figure this out. This is an automatic thing, and as soon as I let go, it figured it out. It spliced it here and here. If I go into my stitch direction, I can do the same thing all the way over, and it figured it out for me. It's a little heavier handed than I am with my stitch directions. Let me change this to, I don't know, pink is the one that I typically use to show because you can see the blue and the black across it. The other thing I don't love about it right now is it's a fill, and typically I would do this as a satin. So, all right, a couple pieces done, and we are really, really close to being done with this. We just have the letters to do, so let me hide this white and we'll come into this letter. I'm just going to give it a stitch direction, and then for the E, I'll give it a single splice line. I'll just do the straight one right across here. And then I will go completely vertically and horizontally here, and that just broke apart beautifully. Now, right here, it's coming to the end, and if I give it just a straight stitch direction across here, it'll go to the end, but as it pushes, it may kind of push around and kind of push itself closed a little bit. If you want, you can right-click and go across it a little bit lower, and that will cut it off a little bit earlier so that it doesn't push closed, and that's a trick we often do. Come back over here, let's do a splice here and a splice here, and then I'm just going to grab my stitch direction line, come across, and let's bow this across a little bit. So now I have my M done, my L, my E, my M, and then we'll come over, we'll just grab C, come across, go, and then I right click and drag at the end, and you'll see me actually do it. Let me delete this and do it again. You'll actually see me do it across the form, but a little bit off so that I get straight to the end of it, and it will kind of snap back to it. And then let's take that O. I'm just going to go both directions because there is a hole and it can navigate around it. So now we're sewing from the center out. And I'm pretty much done digitizing. I want to trim between all these pieces, go into properties. I can shorten this up a little bit. Make sure I have my tie stitches on. Apparently still not short enough. See if I can pay attention. There, it's a little bit better. All right, so that's done, and you can go in and tweak and edit and whatever you want with it. Now, if you really want to get crazy, there is another way to do it, and it will walk you through the entire process, and you can choose what order you want pieces to sew out, and you can do individual pieces of it. I typically go in and grab the pieces as I'm doing it. It just is cleaner in my mind and how I operate, but if you want a little bit more instruction and a little bit more walking through it, you can go up to this last piece, which is the graphic to embroidery assistant, not insistent. Click on it, and it's going to say, how many colors do you have? Well, I have 5. You can remove, you can take out holes, you can do all that kind of stuff. You hit next, it goes, great, what's the first color you want? So you click on it, and then this is the piece that you're dealing with. It knocks everything back that you're not dealing with. Would you like to edit in the colors? You can add pieces to it. So if these two grays were close but not exactly the same, and you wanted them to be exactly the same, you could go ahead and add that piece to it so you're only using one, so you can reduce the number of colors. So that's one way to handle it. And then you would go to next. Here's where you can choose what order you want things to sew out in. You can say manually sequencing, which is I click on one and then the next one and then the next one and then the next one to order it. You can say I want you to start here, I want you to end here with entry and exit points, similar to you do with a fill, but it will do it to multiple elements, or like you do with auto sequencing. Or you can say I want left to right, right to left, or center out. All options. With these two pieces, none of those seem to make sense because you have one and then the other. They're mirror images of each other, so it's not really going to matter. Hit next, and now it's asking for those splice lines if you want them, or the stitch direction lines. I don't want splice lines, I do want stitch direction lines, so I'm going to come across here and across here. Now I have those done, and then I go next, and I'm on to the next color. And what it does is it knocks back the colors that you've already done, and it brings forward the colors that you have not done. So it helps you keep track that way. Lots of words. All right, so you can continue going through this whole thing. So let's do this piece next. Do I really want all of these holes? Probably not. So I'm going to delete all the holes because, like I said before with those letters, I probably don't want them. Hit next. There's only one piece. Hit next. Add my stitch direction. I'm going to go at a slight angle here. Next. Now let's move on to the red. So I'm going to click on the red. Do I want to do all the red? Maybe, maybe not. If I don't, I can subtract like Melco from it. So maybe I want to sew Melco last. I can go in and subtract those pieces from it by clicking on it with this removing tool. Hit next. Just the one piece, so ordering's not a problem. I'm going to give my stitch directions now. Here we go. Next. Let's do this black piece. Next. One piece, not super worried about it. All right, let's automatically do those splice lines, and here I'm going to click on it. And then I'm going to automatically do the stitch direction lines because you guys have watched me digitize this 2 or 3 times already. Let's do next, and now let's focus on this piece. I do not want the border this time. I've already done it, so I'm going to remove that. I'm going to go next. Here is where kind of that manually sequencing things, or you want to think about what you're doing with the sequencing a little bit more. If I wanted to do the center piece, and so the L, and then the E, and then the C, and then the M, and then the O, I can do it by clicking on one and then the other. If I wanted to go center out a little bit faster, I could click on center out. It's going to go one way and then the other. Next. Let's insert those splice lines real quick. Across here, and across here. That works. Stitch direction line here, here, here. Bring this down a little bit so it doesn't push so bad. Across here, here, here. If so, I don't know if I can make it do it now. Delete this. Nope, can't make it do it now. But before I did this, you saw that there was a slight incomplete stitch on the bottom. If you were having trouble with those incomplete stitches, a right click and drag will give it that end line, and that will fix that incomplete stitch for you. Across here, go right click and drag to finish those edges. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not, and honestly, it kind of depends on the shape that you're digitizing. All right, so once I'm done, I can hit exit, and I am done. It hides my graphic, so it walked me through all of those pieces. It's kind of up to you which of any of these tools you use. I did kind of skip over one. I'm sorry for that. Let me open up Chili again and select it. I don't even know that you need to select it. You can choose Stitch Graphic Region, which kind of works like a Stitches paint bucket. I just fill in this area with stitches, and I just click on where I want it, and it becomes stitches. So that's another way to do it. Typically, I would do that, I think, more with Raster. Not entirely sure. Yeah, I think so, because I think if I was using vector, I would grab the shape and then grab the tools. But again, it's what feels right to you and feels natural to you and is what you like using. So if you like a tool and it works well for you, use it. One other thing I wanted to mention about converting artwork, and I'm going to bring up design. I think I showed this to you guys before in a different session. It's the barn my mom volunteers at. They do really great work in Texas with therapeutic horse riding. I did, because I was showing you needle sizes. I remember that now. But I had this raster image. Some of this is not going to translate well if I try to automatically convert it. Now I manually digitized all of this, except the lettering. Sometimes you will have much better luck. If it's super clean and nice, you can get away with converting it. Sometimes what you may want to consider doing is just finding embroidery lettering, let me change this to pink, that matches very, very closely. Now, because this was so small, I chose not to match exactly, but close, but still sew out well. And honestly, the people that work for this facility were pretty happy with the outcome. So, and I checked with them first, obviously. But so keep that in mind. With conversion, you may want to choose a keyboard alphabet that looks really close, and you'll have perhaps a little bit better stitch quality with that. But as you get more comfortable with it, you can of course go ahead and digitize your own. It's completely up to you, but just keep in mind those keyboard lettering pieces may be really handy for you for one, saving you a lot of time, two, dealing with really small things, and three, just convenience factor. So I hope that helps with some of those more kind of automatic questions or embroidery assistant questions. I will try to take a look at the comments. I have a really tough time talking to the camera, doing stuff with Design Shop, and reading comments at the same time. My brain just kind of shuts off. So hopefully I've had a buddy in there checking while you guys have been watching. But I will try to look back over as soon as I'm done here and answer any questions that I can, and we'll be looking a little bit later as well. So have a safe and wonderful holiday, and I will see you when we get done.